like to introduce our first speaker, which is Marion. She's a UX and UI designer at the design agency Futurice, but she's going to tell you a little more about that in a second. But a fun fact is that Marion used to work at Goodpatch as well, and she got me into the topic of accessibility because she was holding a talk when I started at Goodpatch, and that really made an impact. And she suggested a book to me back then that I've read that was really interesting and really opening up the topic for me, which is called Mismatch by Kat Holmes. But I think Marion can tell you more about herself, so I would like to give the stage to you. And yeah, hi.
Hi, happy to be here. Thank you for the very nice introduction. I hope you can hear me well and see me. I cannot share my screen at the moment, but once I can, I would love to start my presentation. Okay, seems like it's working now.
Perfect. Just quickly, would you like me to mute myself, or would you like to have some sort of feedback during your presentation?
Whatever better suits you. I'm fine with both.
Okay. I will mute myself then, and the stage is yours.
Cool. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining and attending this talk where I'm going to talk about the bare minimum risk and benefits regarding accessibility. Thank you to the Product Crunch team for inviting me. Happy to be to some extent back at Goodpatch for today's event. Oops. My name is Marion, and I am a French UX UI designer. I live and work in Berlin for 3 years, and for 2 years now, I've been specializing in accessibility. I work for a company that is called Futurice. It's a consultancy. We offer services like strategy, design, and engineering. But what is important for me, at least at Futurice, is that there is a task force there in which I am involved that has been created in 2019. And our goal with this task force is to enable our community and our client to create more accessible products for a better, more inclusive society. To reach this goal, we do offer certification from the International Association of the Accessibility Professional. I am myself CPAC certified professional, and we do also organize events. Last year, there was the Global Accessibility Awareness Day that we had. And by the way, if you are interested in learning more about accessibility, this event is happening also tomorrow. We will not organize anything that year externally, but you might want to check out the website because there might be interesting events for you to see there. We also do organize internal training, and we have auditing services. As someone that is advocating for accessibility on a regular basis, I often got repetitive questions or concerns about it. One of them that I heard still recently is, we only do this because it's a legal requirement, so how much effort should we be putting into that? In that talk, I would like to explore what I hear when I hear this statement, what lies behind it for me. And then I'd love to have a conversation with you. Oh. What happened? This part of the slide? Oh. Okay, it seems like one part of my slide is not showing up. Anyway, I'm gonna talk about it with this slide then. Sorry about this. What I wanted to talk about is one of the main regulation that exists, which is the ADA. It stands for the American with Disabilities Act. It's one of the most famous regulation that exists nowadays. It's a civil rights regulation that is happening in the US. It was signed in 1990s. And this regulation is famous because it was one of the first, or the first civil rights law that was offering some sort of protection for people with disabilities within the USA. What is interesting to note about the ADA is that the number of cases has significantly been increasing over the time. Normally, I had a very nice graph showing the number of increases that happened, but basically, I think there was about 200 cases that, or 200 lawsuits cases using the ADA as a legal background in 2016. And last year, there were over 3,000 cases. So almost 10 cases per day, which is huge. The question is why there is such a big increase in the use of the ADA as a legal way of asking for accessibility. It's important to consider that this regulation was used was signed in the 90s when there were not so many digital services. But with the time, more and more digital services happened, and people started to use this regulation as a background when when basically the service was not accessible. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work, but more and more we consider digital services as part of our environment, and therefore the ADA becomes a way of enforcing accessibility in the process of digital product. One good example of this and the ambiguity that comes with it is the National Association of the Deaf, who filed a lawsuit against Netflix in 2011. The reason why they did that was that despite asking several times for adding closed captions to the video on their online streaming platform, Netflix didn't agree. And that's why they filled out a lawsuit against them. Netflix during the lawsuits argued that the ADA wasn't applying to them because the ADA was applying to public accommodation and referring to physical spaces, while Netflix was not a physical space. However, the judge decided that despite the ambiguous wording, the ADA was applying to their case. And as a result, Netflix lost and had to pay legal fees and damages, but also caption a whole video library by 2014. Nowadays, all videos from Netflix are captions and are even customizable. And I think this is also an important thing to take away from this example, is that to some extent, they find a solution to this problem, they solved it, and they even provide style guides for captions. And we can even find on their partner help center, because they are not actually the one providing the caption, they are the one who are checking that they are good, or checking the quality of the caption. They explain why the standards are so high. It's important to remember that behind the regulation, there are people. In the case of the ADA, it wouldn't have been possible without the work done by the disability rights activists from the 60s to the 90s, such as Ed Roberts. Ed Roberts fought for equal rights for people with disability for his whole life. His actions were instrumental in getting curb cuts in the city of Berkeley first, and then throughout many big cities in the USA. Indeed, Ed Roberts got polio at age 14, and after that, he has to use a wheelchair and a specific machine to be able to breathe. And at that time, when you were in a wheelchair, it was extremely hard to cross the streets of a city without using a wheelchair, without using the assistance, of someone else, because the curb cut was too high. So through his action, curb cuts were installed in many of the American big cities. And it was also going on forward by being there also for the signature of the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which was also one of the first law in the US at a federal level that was offering protection for people with disability. And Ed was not alone to take on this fight. And that is also something not to forget. We are not talking about a few isolated people here. We are talking about a massive movement happening worldwide. The black and white picture I am showing at the moment was taken on the 12th of March, 1990, the day where the ADA was passed at the Congress. There are many people quoting this picture, and on the foreground, several people using mobility aids like wheelchairs and guide dogs. They are holding signs saying "We shall overcome" and "Access is a civil right." It's also important to realize that this movement never weakened. Today, we can still find disability activists demonstrating in big cities. The color photograph on the current slide is happening in New York in 2018. There is a huge crowd of people demonstrating and celebrating in the street. On the foreground, many people wear t-shirts from accessibility and disability related associations. This event was a Disability Pride Parade. Those parades are happening worldwide in a common effort to promote the belief that disability is a natural and beautiful part of human diversity. It's important to understand that the goal here is to end the stigma and the invisibilization that comes with disability. This stigma has a concrete name: ableism. It characterizes people who are defined by their disabilities as inferior to the non-disabled. On this basis, people are assigned or denied certain perceived abilities, skills, or character orientations. There are three ways where ableism can become more concrete: attitudinal barriers, which means the way individuals act towards people with disability, for instance, reducing someone to their disability or assuming someone cannot do something because of their disability. Then there is environmental barriers like inaccessible environments, for instance, steps or gaps in public transportation or digital products with no keyboards and voice operability. And finally, institutional barriers like law, policies, and strategies that exclude people with disabilities. Here we can think about not accepting animals in restaurants, including service animals. But there is also laws related to abortion, for instance, or forced sterilization that are still in place in some part of the world. So coming back to this statement that refers to legal requirements and how much effort should we be putting into that, I think it's important to keep in mind that we're not talking about a few users, although we use the term minority. We are talking about communities that have been constantly shut out of the society and stigmatized because of their disabilities. And the reason why the law exists, it's because access is the civil right. For us who are building the web and by extension crafting our future with technologies which give unprecedented opportunities for everyone to have equal access to content, I want to answer back that it depends, how do we want to position ourselves and what kind of society do we want to build? One last example I'd like to mention as something that for me is the bare minimum is Peloton. Peloton is a New York-based exercise equipment and media company launched in 2012. They provide bike and treadmill along with video courses for workouts. They have been building accessibility features based on their community requests. For instance, in November 2018, they implemented captions on all their on-demand classes, and they continue to do that today. And in July 2020, they also enabled TalkBack, that is a screen reader from Google on their bike. It's interesting to see that they answered here to the requests from their community and their users. But beyond that, they also have an accessibility statement on their website on which they commit to reach the AA level of compliance from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And they do provide a way to get in touch with them. So listening to your community of users is important and might be very helpful to prioritize accessibility features. But to me, this is the bare minimum because there is already an international standard that states what are the key accessibility features that should be implemented in all products. It's the Web Content Accessibility Guideline, but are written and updated by the Web Accessibility Initiative from the W3C. If all digital products were integrating those guidelines to their process, all pre-recorded media would be captioned and user wouldn't have to fight for it. And I do dream of a day where this happens. This talk is going to a conclusion already, but as I was very much focusing it on what is happening in the US, I'd like to take a few moments to focus back on Europe and its accessibility regulation. At the moment, we have two accessibility regulations that are being implemented or that are already implemented. First, there is the European Web Accessibility Directive that is already in place, that targets the public sector. According to this law, public sector services should reach the AA level of compliance from the WCAG everywhere in Europe. And the second regulation that has been signed but needs to be implemented and should be implemented by 2025 is the European Accessibility Act. It gives the same level of requirements, but it broadened the scope to e-commerce, banking, transportation, TV, smartphone, e-books, computer, and so on. So we still have a lot of work to do to implement accessibility in our process, but I hope that beyond the regulation, we do put in place what needs to be done so that this happens. Thank you.